Imbolc arrives quietly in Ireland, and that's the first thing that people often kind of misunderstand about it. The days are still cold, the land is still slow, nothing has suddenly burst into life. We're not looking at massive amount of green everywhere or anything. What has changed is not the world yet, but our relationship to what's coming. Imbolc is not a festival of results. It's a festival of readiness. Before I go any further, I want to place myself clearly in this work. I am Lora O'Brien, and I've been practicing Irish witchcraft for over 30 years, living and working here in Ireland with academic training in Irish history and decades of daily lived engagement with Irish tradition as something present and ongoing. This podcast is a presentation of the Irish Pagan School, and what I share here is shaped by responsibility to that living tradition, rather than by modern seasonal storytelling or, clickbait or anything. In the previous episode, we talked about keeping the hearth steady through January. So from there, Imbolc is about deciding what that hearth is for. So definitely go back and listen to the previous episode if you haven't already. But this isn't kind of deciding in grand visionary terms, but in very practical ones. What are you actually willing to tend this year? What deserves heat and what does not? Now, the word Imbolc carries several meanings, including associations as Imbolg, with in the belly, and as Imbolc, with milk and with cleansing. All of those point to process rather than outcome. Something is forming, but it's not necessarily visible yet. Something is being nourished, but it's not quite ready to stand on its own. In traditional Irish life, Imbolc mattered because it marked a shift in our responsibility. The worst of the winter might still be ahead, honestly, but preparation could no longer be postponed. We couldn't just sit in the dark and hide by the fire anymore. Animals needed care, especially if, young were coming, making an appearance. Food stores needed managing. The household needed to be ready for increased demand before growth actually arrived. This is why fire is central at Imbolc, but not as celebration. This isn't a Bealtaine of fire. This is decision fire. Precision fire even. We're talking candle fire, hearth fire, fire that is lit deliberately, not automatically. Imbolc is also inseparable from Brigid or Brigid, who in Irish tradition holds a complex and continuous presence as both goddess and saint. She is associated with healing, with poetry and smithcraft, which are all arts that require patience, skill, repetition. None of them are fast. None of them are forced either. So welcoming Brigid at Imbolc is not about asking for inspiration or blessing in the abstract. It's about preparing your household and yourself so that inspiration, so that health, so that creative work have somewhere to land without being wasted. So what I'm going to give you now is a simple Imbolc preparation charm that builds directly on the steadiness work of episode 6. So again, go back and listen to the previous episode if you haven't already, without actually repeating it. So I wanted to kind of build up a little rhythm for you at this time of the year. And it's not about maintaining the fire you already have. This is about choosing what new fire, if any, you are willing to take responsibility for. We are planning, we are making choices, we are preparing the way. So you're going to need a candle that you have not yet used and a small cloth or piece of fabric. Now, the cloth doesn't need to be special. In Irish folk practice, ordinary things are often or usually preferred because they already belong to your daily life and it's easier to integrate them than if you have something like special, right? Now, you can use special things if you want, absolutely, but you don't have to. So you begin by choosing a quiet moment. This doesn't need to be on a specific date, honestly. Some people observe Brigid's Eve on the 31st of January. Some people observe Brigid's Day on the 1st of February. Some observe Candlemas on the 2nd of February. And others respond to the signs in the land. And Imbolc becomes astrological or astronomical even. Honestly, Irish tradition allows for this flexibility. The whole month of February could be Imbolc, really. So place the candle somewhere steady and safe, ideally near where you prepare food or sit regularly. Then place the cloth beside it. And before lighting the candle, just sit for a moment, take a deep breath, and consider what you are not going to ask of this year. Now, this matters because, especially the way the world is outside, gestures at everything, it's really, really important that we choose where our energy is going. We choose what we want to focus on. We choose what we want to feed so that it can grow. So in my practice, Imbolc is as much about refusal as invitation. You're not required to grow everything. That way lies overwhelm and burnout and madness. So please, please, please be very considered in what you are choosing and what you are feeding with this energy. So once you have considered what you're not going to ask of this year, you know, what you're leaving behind, where your focus is not going to be, then of course you focus on what you want to choose. So what do you want to grow? And then you light the candle calmly. You speak aloud, plainly. No need for flourish, no need for big gestures. Irish charms really work because they are very clear. So just for example, because I know some people need it, please use your own words if at all possible. But an example of the kind of words you might use, you might say, this is the fire I choose to tend. What's already steady is respected. What's ready to grow is welcomed carefully. What I cannot nourish is not taken on. This household prepares without forcing. So say this once, slowly, let the words settle. And then after you speak, hold the cloth briefly near the candle flame. Now, not close enough to scorch it, please be careful, but close enough to acknowledge the fire, to absorb the fire's energy without actually setting it on fire, please. And then place the cloth somewhere where it can rest overnight. And this is a nod to a broth Brigid, Brigid's cloth. It's the same process. So traditionally in Ireland, on Brigid's Eve, you would leave out a piece of cloth and you would put it on a window ledge or, you know, on a doorstep or somewhere basically that Brigid is going to pass by in the night, right? And it absorbs the energy of Brigid or Brigid and then is used traditionally in folk medicine as a cure for headaches and all of this. So this charm basically echoes this, or, uses that tradition or expands on that tradition, or, piggybacks on it or whatever, especially at this time of the year. So I would say you can do it as well as a Broth Brigid if you want to do that on specific Brigid's Eve, which is the 31st of January. So both a Broth Brigid and your fire-infused cloth can be kept afterward as a source of comfort and care. The Broth Brigid is specifically for, as I mentioned, headaches and strain or stress. It seems to be, in my experience, seems to be really good for colds and flu and sinuses and things like that. I would literally put it on my forehead if I find a migraine coming. Your fire cloth could be, it's basically a source of support for whatever you want to grow for the year, and a reminder that what's steady is respected, what's ready to grow is welcomed carefully, and what you can't nourish is not taken on. So it's a reminder of your spell, it's a support for your spell. So keep that close too. And then I would just allow the candle to burn for a few minutes, really kind of, again, allowing this cloth to absorb that energy. You can go over the spell or the charm again if you want, but honestly, saying it once is all that's needed. But if you need to say it again, say it again. And then you extinguish the candle safely. This is tended fire. You don't have to abandon it. And it's very specific and very focused, right? So in the days that follow doing this spell or charm, as we move through the Imbolg period, if you're listening to this as it's released, and you can do this any time of the year, by the way, anytime. Like if you're finding this podcast and it's not at Imbolg time, what I would say is do it on a new moon instead, time it that way and actually access the cycles that way. You can definitely do that throughout the whole year. It actually works as a particularly good spell on a dark moon because you have, this kind of baseline of what's steady, you have what's ready to grow with the new moon and what you can't nourish, so whatever is kind of leaving that cycle. So it's a really good dark moon spell as well as Imbolg. And in the days that follow doing this spell, really notice what asks for your attention and what does not. Because Imbolc work continues through discernment, not through effort. If something requires constant force to stay alive, then my advice, and very much echoed in the Irish tradition, would be to really question whether it should be carried at all. And we have to be discerning with our energy. Now, there are ethical boundaries here, and they're important. This isn't magic to accelerate outcomes or demand productivity. It's magic that protects against overextension. And preparation is not obligation. So you have a right and a responsibility to mind yourself as you're coming into this busier period. And I'm talking to myself as much as any, to be perfectly honest. Because Imbolc teaches restraint as much as hope. You prepare the space, you tend what you choose, and you leave the rest alone. So if you would like deeper, properly grounded Imbolc resources, including historical context, pronunciation guidance, seasonal practices, and fire festival teaching that's rooted in Irish tradition, you can go to irishpagan.school/Imbolc. And that page contains a collection of Imbolc resources, both free and paid, which I've prepared through the Irish Pagan School. And the link will be below as well. So, irishpagan.school/Imbolc, or the link is below in the show notes or under the video description on YouTube if you're listening there. So just remember, Imbolc doesn't ask you to begin everything. Things are bursting to life around you as you process through the month of February. Your job is to begin wisely, to prepare, to leave down what isn't yours to carry, and to step forward very, very conscientiously. So I hope that that's been useful to you, and I will see you next week for another episode. Slán go fóill.